On February 9, 2026, the Utah Jazz were playing on the road in Miami and held an 8-point lead with 6 minutes left in the third quarter. Coach Will Hardy suddenly pulled Jaron Jackson Jr. and Lauri Markkanen from the floor, even though both stars were healthy and playing well at the time. Neither player checked back into the game, and while the Jazz managed to win that night, they ended up losing something much more valuable. Within a few days, the league office hit Utah with a $500,000 fine for conduct detrimental to the NBA. The Jazz front office immediately fired back by pointing out that other teams pull these same stunts every single season. They wanted to know why they were being singled out, and one specific name kept surfacing in the reports: Sam Presti. But here's the twist, because a simple salary dump from 2021 eventually forced Adam Silver to overhaul the entire NBA draft lottery, and you need to stick around to see how it happened. To understand how we got here, you have to look at what the Utah Jazz actually were and what they were trying to become. Historically, the Jazz rank as one of the winningest franchises in NBA history, yet they have never actually managed to win a championship. That specific tension defines their entire operation, because they refuse to embrace outright losing but can never quite reach the top. They spent years building rosters through mid-first round picks and playing the right way, which usually resulted in 50-win seasons that ended with early playoff exits. They were competitive and respected, but they were also completely stuck. Heading into the 2021 season, the Jazz believed they finally had their best shot at changing that narrative. Rudy Gobert had developed into a 3-time Defensive Player of the Year after being drafted 27th overall, and Donovan Mitchell was serving as the high-powered offensive engine. The front office watched the Lakers win the 2020 bubble title with size and physicality, so they decided to re-sign veteran center Derek Favors to help them match up with those dominant bigs. While the move looked good on paper, the Clippers eventually ran a 5-out offense that rained threes from everywhere and knocked Utah out of the playoffs without breaking a sweat. The Favors signing did not just fail to solve their problems, it actually created a massive new one for the books. Favors' contract became dead weight almost immediately, and the Jazz desperately needed cap flexibility to re-sign Mike Conley and keep their championship window open. Dennis Lindsey did what desperate front offices always do and paid another team to take the problem off his hands. Utah sent Favors and a future first-round pick to Oklahoma City, and in exchange for absorbing that contract, the Jazz received cap relief and a distant second rounder. At the time of the deal, nobody put the news on the front page because it seemed like a standard transaction. The protection structure on that specific pick is where this story turns into something else entirely. The pick was top 10 protected in 2024 and 2025, which meant that if Utah's pick landed in the top 10, they kept it and the debt moved to the next year. If the pick landed 11th or worse, it went straight to Oklahoma City. By 2026, the protection tightened to the top 8, meaning that if the pick landed 9th or lower, OKC got it. However, if it landed anywhere between 1st and 8th, Utah kept the pick and the entire obligation simply disappeared. This setup created a massive cliff where finishing 8th worst in the NBA instead of 9th worst was the difference between keeping a valuable lottery pick or handing it over for nothing. This was not a gradual change in value, but a binary outcome that functioned more like a high-stakes financial gamble than a basketball trade. One single spot in the standings would either save the asset entirely or wipe it out for good. Any rational front office looks at that math and realizes exactly what the situation demands of them. Sam Presti understood this perfectly on the other end of the deal, and he was not actually worried about Derek Favors. He was buying a high upside option on a future Jazz lottery pick, and he knew exactly how this game would eventually play out. Let's find out how it all fell apart. While Utah was still trying to convince itself the window was open, OKC was already 4 steps ahead of everyone else. When the Thunder lost Paul George to the Clippers back in 2019, Sam Presti turned what looked like a total disaster into the most aggressive asset grab in league history. OKC walked away with Shai Gilgeous-Alexander and 5 first-round picks, and over the next few years, Presti stacked 18 first-rounders across 7 seasons. The goal here wasn't to compete for a title right away, but rather to collect enough lottery tickets that a good outcome became inevitable. But here's the part that matters. Collecting picks only works if those picks turn into good players. To make that happen, OKC had to lose, and they managed to do that with uncomfortable precision. Josh Giddey was having a Rookie of the Year caliber season going into February of 2022 when the team suddenly shut him down with hip soreness. The following month, SGA was averaging 24 points per game before he was also shut down with ankle soreness. The Thunder finished 24-58, which landed them a top 2 pick and the 12th pick from the Clippers, and those became Chet Holmgren and Jalen Williams. That's the OKC Big Three, and they built it entirely through losing with intention. The Jazz watched all of this play out and eventually reached the same conclusion Danny Ainge had been circling for months. The window was officially closed, so Donovan Mitchell went to Cleveland, Rudy Gobert went to Minnesota, and Utah engaged the full take. This is exactly where that Derek Favors pick protection started compounding into a massive problem for the franchise. Utah decided to tank, but lottery luck is brutal, and over 2 years the best they managed was a single top 5 pick. They didn't find that franchise-altering talent they needed, and meanwhile the protection clock was ticking toward a total disaster. It was top 10 in 2024, top 10 in 2025, and then the tightest cliff of all arrived with a top 8 protection in 2026. Then the 2026 draft class arrived and changed the calculus for every front office in the league. People were calling it the best class since 2003, with prospects like AJ Debonsa and Darren Peterson drawing genuine generational talent comparisons. Suddenly, it wasn't just Utah racing for the bottom of the standings, because the Kings, the Nets, and the Pacers all saw the same prize and started managing their records. Now the CEO scorecard comparison becomes stark, because Presti had already cashed out while Ainge was still waiting. OKC won the 2025 championship, meaning Presti built a title roster while still holding the Jazz's pick as a free option on even more upside. Ainge, meanwhile, had his franchise trapped in a lose-or-lose scenario where there was no clean path forward. If they finished too high, the pick would go to a team that already had a ring. But if they finished in the bottom 3, they were just competing against other tankers for a top 8 spot that barely protected them. Under the old lottery rules, the 3 worst teams each held roughly a 14% shot at the number 1 pick. That is enough expected value to justify losing on purpose, especially when the alternative is finishing 9th and watching your most valuable asset walk out the door to Oklahoma City. The cliff that the Favors protection created was essentially worth more in value than most mid-season trades, and rational actors are going to exploit that every single time. This wasn't new behavior for the league, as Sam Hinkie's rebuild in Philadelphia from 2013 to 2018 created this same integrity alarm. He would accumulate assets, lose on purpose, and draft superstars. So the league responded in 2019 by flattening the lottery odds. Teams simply adapted to the new math, and the cat and mouse game continued until the Mavericks drew fines in 2023 for late season sit-outs. What Dallas did looked indistinguishable from what the Jazz were doing 3 years later. The pattern is always the same, because individual teams will always optimize rationally within the rules they are given. The problem is that those rules create perverse outcomes at scale, and eventually, someone with authority looks at the product and decides the optimization has gone too far. The league has a $76 billion media deal with Amazon, NBC, and ESPN, and that February 9th game was the evidence Adam Silver needed to justify an intervention. On May 11th, The Athletic published the details of Silver's proposed overhaul to the system. The new 3-2-1 lottery dropped the bottom 3 teams' odds at the number 1 pick from 14% down to just 5.4%. More than that, those same 3 teams could now draft no better than 12th if the lottery balls didn't go their way. The league wasn't just reducing the reward for losing, but they were actually introducing a penalty for it, and the Board of Governors approved the measure 29-1. On the surface, the math seems to work out for the league. If finishing last gives you a 5.4% shot, while teams ranked 4th through 10th hold 8.1%, the incentive to be historically bad collapses. No owner wants to absorb the revenue damage of a 20-win season for a worse draft position than a team that almost made the play-in, but the reform tightens a trap that already existed for small markets like Utah. OKC and the Jazz built their rosters through the exact system Silver just dismantled, and under these new rules, a team in Utah's 2022 position has no reliable path to a superstar. Free agency still flows to Los Angeles, New York, and Miami, so the new system doesn't solve the small market disadvantage at all. It just removes the one structural lever those teams could actually pull to get better. Draft pick currency is repricing across the board as well. The new rules ban top 12 through top 15 protections on newly traded picks entirely, which eliminates some of the most common trade structures in the NBA. Swap rights lose value, and protected picks get harder to model for general managers. The Presti playbook of buying picks cheap with cap space and letting probability do the work is much harder to replicate now that the upside on lottery picks is compressed. The Jazz ultimately won their coin flip for the 4th lottery slot, which mathematically guaranteed them a top 8 pick, and killed OKC's claim to it entirely. They got exactly what they tanked for, but the system that made it possible is gone forever. It is a clean bit of irony that a salary dump nobody cared about in 2021 ended up being the domino that forced the most significant draft reform in history. A single protection clause led to 5 years of compounding consequences and put a $76 billion product on the line. The Jazz Thunder trade didn't break the rules, but it broke the incentives, which is always more dangerous. Subscribe for more breakdowns like this, and share it with someone who thinks tanking is just a basketball strategy.